I had recently taken a trip to Ohio, and my first thoughts when I got there was, what kind of cryptids they got here? If you're like me, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Before smartphones, before viral cryptid threads, before anyone ever said, Accio in a movie theater, a man driving through Loveland, Ohio, claims he saw 3 frog-like humanoids standing beneath a bridge, and upon discovery, one of them raised what seemed to be a wand into the air and shot sparks into the night sky. And decades later, in August of 2016, right as millions of people were wandering the world hunting digital creatures playing Pokémon Go, someone claimed they had photographed one of these frog creatures around the same stretch of water. Tonight, we are talking about the Loveland Frogman. Eyewitness accounts, police reports, a wand that makes absolutely no sense, and the Pokémon Go sighting that dragged the legend from the 1950s into the modern era. Let's head to the river. The story begins March of 1955. A traveling businessman was driving late at night along a lonely road near the Little Miami River in Loveland, Ohio. It was dark, quiet, the kind of rural stretch where your headlights feel like they're the only light source in the world. As he passed under a bridge, he noticed figures gathered along the roadside. At first, he assumed they were children. But as he slowed down, the proportions started to not make sense. The figures were around 3 to 4 feet tall, standing upright. Their skin appeared leathery, their heads were wide and frog-like, their eyes reflected in the headlights. One of them lifted something into the air. The witness described it as a wand, a thin object that emitted sparks. Not a reflection, not a shine, sparks. Startled and terrified, the man sped away and later reported what he had seen. So here's the part that makes that account a little bit strange. When someone misidentifies an animal, they normally end up describing said creature and it ends up kind of appearing to be like an animal. When someone tends to exaggerate a story, they tend to embellish the creature itself. But introducing a wand, specifically a wand that's shooting sparks, it sort of takes this out of the unidentified animal category and moves it over into the ritualistic folklore end of the spectrum. And remember, this was 1955. This was long before Harry Potter was all through the movies and bookshelves and made wand imagery culturally iconic. So what exactly do we think he saw? 17 years later, the legend resurfaced, and this time it involved law enforcement. In March of 1972, Officer Ray Shockey of Loveland Police Department was driving near the same river. He noticed something crouched near the roadside. Initially, he assumed it was an injured animal. But as he approached, the creature stood upright. Shockey later described it as roughly 3 to 4 feet tall with leathery skin and a face that didn't look quite human or animal. It climbed over the guardrail and disappeared towards the river. 2 weeks later, another officer, Mark Matthews, reported seeing a similar creature in nearly the exact same area. According to reports, he even fired at it after it startled him. The creature allegedly fell, then moved and slipped away into the water. Years later, upon being interviewed, Matthew's story began to shift, now stating he actually shot the creature, and upon approaching the body, he had determined it to be a very large iguana that was missing its tail, suggesting it was possibly someone's escaped pet. And on the surface, that explanation sounds reasonable, except for one problem. In 1972 rural Ohio, iguanas were not really a common thing to see on the roadside. They still aren't. And 2 separate police officers describing a 3-foot-tall leathery-skinned reptilian along the same stretch of river. That's an unusual coincidence. While the wand detail was not in these encounters, the physical description stayed exactly the same as the 1955 encounter, which raises the uncomfortable possibility either multiple people misidentified something in identical ways, or something was actually there. Let's circle back to that wand emitting sparks, because this detail refuses to fit any logical box. If a witness misidentified a frog, lizard, or even another human, why add the sparks in the wand? And why describe the creature as holding and intentionally raising said object? Some skeptics suggest it could have been a reflective surface catching headlights. Others speculate it may have been a lighter, cigarette, or some mundane item interpreted through fear. But sparks imply motion and energy. They imply something active, not accidental. It almost reads less like a wildlife sighting and more like a folklore encounter, something that feels ritualistic or symbolic. And that's where the Loveland Frogman becomes more than just a weird animal story. It begins brushing up against myth, river spirits, amphibious guardians, liminal entities that exist at boundaries, especially near water and bridges. And that theme of location is important, because every major sighting shares one detail. It happens near the Little Miami River, near crossings and thresholds, and in folklore, bridges are not just infrastructure, they're symbolic boundaries. Then we jump to 2016. Pokémon Go launches in July, and within weeks millions of people are wandering parks, trails, and rivers, staring at glowing screens, chasing digital monsters layered over real-world environments. Places they might not normally explore, and at times wouldn't normally be out. Not to derail us here, that was probably the most peaceful period in human history, at least while I've been alive. And I can attest to this, to the fact that I'm up all hours of the night because I myself am a cryptid and I am normally collecting wild Furbies so they don't hurt anyone else. There were people at college campuses at 4 in the morning running around screaming if they found a rare Pokemon. Unhinged time to be alive. If you missed out, it sucks to suck, but you missed out. On August 3rd, barely a month after the game's release, a man near Lake Isabella in Loveland claimed he encountered a large frog-like creature while playing Pokemon Go. It was not Politoed, Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, or Venusaur. He said he saw something unusual near the water and took a photograph. The image showed what appeared to be a frog standing upright along the riverbank. It was not crystal clear or cinematic, and it definitely did not prove anything. But it was enough. Enough to reignite decades-old headlines. Enough to push the Loveland Frogman back into the public conversation. Skeptics argue that it could have just been a large bullfrog photographed at an odd angle, especially the fact that that photo has nothing to make scale reference with. And that explanation makes sense, but the timing is what fascinates people. A legend tied to a specific river suddenly resurfaces the exact moment that thousands of people are encouraged to wander their environment in search of creatures. It almost felt symbolic, as if the folklore adapted to the technology. But that still begs the question, what is the Frogman? There are a few possible explanations. It could be misidentification amplified by memory and storytelling over time. It could have been escaped exotic pets, like iguanas or large reptiles, interpreted under poor lighting. It could have been urban legend growth, where repeated retellings smooth inconsistencies and create a more cohesive myth. Or, and this is the possibility that keeps cryptid lore alive, it could represent something we fully do not understand. Because here's what's consistent. They're short encounters, nighttime settings, proximity to water, and disappearing without a trace. There's no bodies, no clear sustained footage, just enough to keep the story alive. There's also something just truly unsettling about amphibious creatures. With their ancient, almost prehistoric appearance, they move between water and land. They can emerge quietly, and the way their eyes reflect light, it almost feels unnatural. When you combine that with the human posture, just the idea of it standing upright, you get something that hits the brain in an uncanny way. It almost reminds me of the Fluke Man from the X-Files, the episode The Host, if you're familiar. That alone was giving people nightmares for generations, and you can see why. And when that silhouette appears beneath a bridge at night, only illuminated faintly by your headlights, your mind starts to fill in the blanks. Maybe the Loveland Frogman is just a frog being photographed at a weird angle. Maybe an escaped reptile in the 70s. Maybe the wand was just a trick of light misremembered over the course of time. But here's the interesting thing. Every time this legend resurfaces, it adapts to the era. In 1955, it has a mysterious wand. In 1972, there's police confrontation. In 2016, it appears during the launch of a game designed to hunt creatures in augmented reality. The setting changes, the technology changes, but the river stays the same. And if something has been watching from that riverbank for decades, it doesn't need to prove it exists. It just needs to be seen once in a while to remind us the story isn't over yet. For me, personally, I'm Team Frog Wizard. Not literally, I don't think it's real, but this is a lot of fun. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments below, and as always, stay curious, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.